Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I call this hearing to order. I'd like to request unanimous consent that Mr. Peters join us on the dais for this hearing. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Thanks for being here. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning for today's field hearing of the House Veterans Affairs Economic Opportunity Subcommittee. It's with great pride that I serve as chair of the subcommittee and that I'm able to bring Congress to my constituents, my district in Oceanside, California today. For those coming from Washington, thanks for being here. I think you recognize why I love this district so much. I hope you get to enjoy the beautiful coastline while you're here. Our subcommittee addresses many challenges for our nation's veterans, such as housing, homelessness, transitions to civilian life, higher education, and job training. Today, our hearing titled Housing Our Heroes, Addressing the Veteran Homelessness Crisis, will examine how federal, state, local, and non-governmental resources are working together to reduce veteran homelessness. We'll also review how all of these important partners can better coordinate. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting with VA Secretary Wilkie in my Washington office to discuss our collaboration on veterans issues. He made clear his desire to send more resources to Southern California and specifically to the 49th District because, and I quote the Secretary, if you can solve veteran homelessness in Southern California, you can solve it anywhere. In 2009, the Department of Veterans Affairs committed to ending veteran homelessness by the end of 2015. There's no question that we've taken significant steps to get our heroes the services they need, with roughly 50,000 fewer veterans experiencing homelessness than a decade ago. However, we have much work still to do before we meet our goal, especially in California, where 28% of our nation's homeless veterans are located. There are a number of factors that make California unique: high cost of living, several military bases close to our urban centers, and a climate that is less taxing on everyone, and that includes on homeless individuals. But while these factors contribute to homelessness, we're also a state and nation with many resources. That means we have no excuse to fail those who proudly have served in uniform. This Congress, my subcommittee, has continued working to improve the variety of federal programs that currently exist to support our homeless veterans. This includes permanent housing, transitional housing, prevention services, treatment, and employment programs at the VA, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD, and the Department of Labor. HUD also offers some additional resources to local or regional planning organizations, also referred to as continuums of care. But yet, homelessness, and specifically veteran homelessness, continues to persist. In addition to the testimony we will hear today, and we've got some fantastic witnesses, our committee is currently reviewing a number of bills to address veteran homelessness, and each of us has authored and worked together on these bills. It's important to know that they're being done in a bipartisan way as well. One of my bills, the Housing for Women Veterans Act, would ensure a portion of supportive services for veteran families grants go to organizations that have a focus on women veterans and their families. This program provides financial assistance, case management, and other services to low-income veterans who are residing in permanent housing or transitioning from homelessness. And I support two bills that my colleague Mr. Peters has introduced to improve the HUD-BASH program, which provides housing vouchers to our homeless veterans. Beyond these efforts, we're here to learn from you, from our witnesses, from those in the community about how we can better support your work. And I'm going to recognize my colleagues in just a second, but before I do that, I'd like to say thank you to the staff who are here. Thank you to the staff who came out from the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you to the staff of our respective offices, and thank you to our wonderful hosts here in North County and at the County of San Diego for opening your facility. Can we give all the staff a round of applause? So with that, I've got three of my friends and three great members to recognize. I'd like to start with my friend Gus Bilirakis, who's the ranking member on the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee from Florida. We're working together on a number of pieces of legislation. And with that, you have 5 minutes, or as long as you need.
I won't take too long.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. It's great to be here in California, and particularly in this part of the state. And I I will tell you, your member of Congress is doing an outstanding job. I'm the ranking member of the committee, but I also tell you that the chairman is doing a great job. The chairman of the full committee, Chairman Takano, Representative Peters and I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee together, and he's a great member as well. But as far as the Veterans Affairs Committee, it has been working for the most part in a bipartisan fashion, and I credit these two gentlemen for doing so. So we are putting our veterans first and putting aside the labels as much as possible. I thank all of you for joining us here today for this field hearing of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity of the House on Veterans Affairs, the Committee on Veterans Affairs. My name is Gus Bilirakis, and not only is it a pleasure to serve as a congressman for the 12th Congressional District of Florida, which includes the Tampa Bay area. I think most people know where that is. But also to serve as the ranking member of this subcommittee. Before we begin, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here at the North County Coastal Military and Veterans Resource Center, and thank my colleague and friend, of course, Chairman of the subcommittee, Congressman Mike Levin, for hosting us today. It is great to work with a thoughtful legislator like Mike Levin on our continued goal to provide economic opportunities to veterans. The people of the 49th District are lucky to have him as one of their own. And I will tell you that I believe that our committee is a model for the rest of the House, because we're actually getting things done for true American heroes. Today, we are here to examine and highlight programs and benefits that help combat veteran homelessness. There's been significant progress, as the chairman stated, made nationwide in reducing homelessness among veterans. Several municipalities have even eliminated veteran homelessness altogether. While this is good news, as funding for homeless veteran programs at VA and the Department of Labor have reached record levels, we must ensure that we have a true picture of how this money is being spent. While I believe it is important to provide veterans with housing through VA's HUD-VASH housing voucher program, it is even more critical for the long-term success of these veterans that they also receive comprehensive wraparound services that help them find meaningful employment. Without helping veterans find meaningful employment, we are only providing homeless veterans temporary housing and not setting them up for positive long-term outcomes. The Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program administered by the Department of Labor is designed to provide homeless veteran providers with grant funds to provide job training programs. And while HVRP has been determined to be one of the most successful job training grant programs in the federal government, I know there's always room for improvement. I'm grateful to our witnesses for giving us an opportunity to hear directly from those on the ground in this fight against veterans' homelessness about what they believe works, doesn't work, and how we in Congress can help combat this problem. Everyone here shares the common goal to ensure those who have worn the cloth of our country are never homeless. I also want to thank the staff, Mr. Chairman, on both sides of the aisle for doing an outstanding job, and thank you for hosting this. This is going to be very productive, this hearing. Once again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me and hosting us today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. I now have the great honor to introduce the Chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, who is doing a tremendous job. He is a friend and a leader on veterans issues and in Congress generally. We can debate whether San Diego or Riverside has the best veterans in the United States, but my friend Mark Takano is truly an exemplary leader in the House. Chairman Takano, for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Levin, and I appreciate how you and the ranking member Mr. Bilirakis have worked across the aisle to improve economic opportunities for our nation's veterans. Mr. Bilirakis, I particularly congratulate you on your recent success on your adaptive housing bill. That was a victory not just for you, but for all of us, and it's just an example of how whether you're a minority member of the committee or of the majority, we're moving legislation through to help our veterans, and it does have to do with housing as well.
With your leadership, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, to my left is a tremendous member, a classmate of mine, and somebody who's always had veterans at the core of his values. And it's I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to serve with Congressman Peters. And Congressman Levin, you have hit the ground running, and this is such an important issue, addressing veteran homelessness. This field hearing is a testament to both the majority and minority's desire to come together and examine the negative trends affecting veterans. And veteran homelessness is one of the major issues we have to combat. From the national perspective, we've made tremendous progress. We really have. We've really cut down numbers of people who are veterans, of people who are homeless, veterans who are homeless. But in Southern California, the challenge remains persistently stubborn. We do owe our nation's service members who volunteer to fight for our nation the opportunity to successfully transition out of the armed services and an opportunity to thrive in our community. When I became the chair of the full Veterans Affairs Committee, I made decreasing veteran homelessness one of my top priorities. My work combating veteran homelessness did not begin in the 116th Congress. Improving the lives of veterans has been my passion since I was first elected. And in fact, 5 years ago, when I was the ranking member of the Economic Opportunity Subcommittee, which is this very subcommittee, we held a field hearing on veteran homelessness in Riverside, California. And since then, the county of Riverside has become the only county in California to functionally end veteran homelessness, according to the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Now, I want to be careful. It doesn't mean that there are no homeless veterans. It's a statistical concept of functional zero, achieving functional zero. But nevertheless, I don't want to underplay the importance of this achievement. Although I'd like to take full credit for this feat, it took the combined efforts of Congress, HUD, the Departments of Veterans Affairs, state and local government, veteran service organizations, and private partnerships to functionally end veteran homelessness in Riverside. And the good news is it can be done. It will take an all-hands-on-deck approach to identify all veterans in the community experiencing homelessness and provide them with shelter and wraparound services in an expedited manner. I'm heartened to see that the witnesses present today represent many of the key stakeholders that must come together to end veteran homelessness in Oceanside and throughout California, throughout San Diego County. Make no mistake, we in California have a long road ahead of us. Over 1/4 of the nation's veterans, homeless veterans, reside in California, and the state has seen a 17% rise in homeless veterans from 2016 to 2018. So even as the national numbers have gotten better, the numbers here in California have gotten worse. We understand that veteran homelessness is a complicated issue and that jobs and education are part of the solution, but not the whole solution. We must look at veterans holistically and establish correlations between mental health, substance abuse, single-parent status, rank, discharge status, as well as other indicators with homelessness, and in order to best utilize our resources. We know that not all homeless veterans are on the street and in shelters, so we must improve our methodology for identifying and counting homeless veterans. And we must continue to improve services for homeless veterans with dependents. We must look to new models for providing HUD-VASH vouchers to homeless veterans and potentially incentivize landlords to take more vouchers. And we must also intervene before veterans are in crisis. To do these things, we will need the commitment of all those in the room, and I look forward to working with colleagues on both sides of the aisle and everyone else here today to curtail veteran homelessness. Again, Chairman Levin, I appreciate the opportunity. to make a few comments, and I look forward to the testimonies today.
Thank you, Chairman, for your great leadership, and I think the ranking member said it well. You know, we're working together and we're getting things done. I know in our subcommittee we've gotten a number of bills through subcommittee, through full committee, and passed in the House, and a number of them already signed into law. So if anybody ever thinks that nothing is happening in Washington, if you only are watching, you know, cable news, they don't always cover this stuff, but we are getting really important things done, and nowhere is that more evident than our veterans, and it's only possible with the leadership of Chairman Takano. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Representative Peters, for his opening statement. Scott has been a great mentor. You know, when you get to Washington, nobody tells you how you set up your district office and how you actually have a good operation. And Scott and his team were incredibly gracious with us to make sure that we had a really great district office operation. He's a great leader on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we're working together on a number of areas that are of regional importance to Greater San Diego, and that certainly includes veterans, where Scott is leading some really important initiatives. So with that, I'll turn it over to my friend, Representative Peters.
Thank you, Chairman Levin, and thanks to Ranking Member Bilirakis for joining us today from Florida. Chairman Takano making the trip from Riverside. It's great to have you here. If you represent the County of San Diego, where we have over 235,000 veterans, I think one of the largest communities in the country, you are going to work on veterans issues. Last Congress, I was able to be a member of the Veterans Committee. I'm not on the committee this Congress, but I appreciate you letting me wave in and sit with you today, because this is of critical importance to my constituents in the entire region. It is a shame that we have veterans living on the streets in San Diego. I'm proud of the progress we've made nationally over the last decade. California is still challenged, but San Diego actually has seen some progress, and so I think we ought to recognize that. We have a long way to go, but there's a lot of people in here from government agencies and nonprofits who've been working pretty hard, who deserve some thanks for that. I worked to end veteran homelessness while in Congress. I think it's important to note also that homeless veterans are twice as likely to take their own lives as veterans who are housed. Another issue that we have with veteran suicide, it's important aspect of that is with respect to homelessness. I have, as was mentioned, worked to support and improve the HUD VA Supportive Housing, or the VASH voucher program. And earlier this year, we secured commensurate VA case management funding to make sure that any increase in funding for vouchers is met with equivalent funding for supportive services. And recently, I've introduced two bills, both of which have passed this committee. The first allows veterans with other than honorable discharges to receive these housing vouchers and supportive services from the VA. And the other, second bill, will direct HUD and VA to look at how best to serve homeless veterans in high-cost housing markets, like we have throughout California and specifically in San Diego. I won't replay the bipartisanship comments, except to say that I think it is true that the Veterans Committee is the most bipartisan forum in Congress. I think that's a credit that has to do with the fact that we know we're all pulling together. We don't have a lot of enemies in that space. But I did want to say thank you to the veteran service organizations. The VSOs provide a tremendous amount of guidance from the veterans community itself to help us make sure we get it right, and to call us out on both sides of the aisle when we're not getting it right. And so we want to thank you for that. And I just also want to thank the folks from the VA, from Washington and locally, for the work that you do. It's not easy. Sometimes Congress doesn't make it easy on you, but the work is very important, and thank you for being here and for what you do. And with that, I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Representative Peters. I want to echo the thanks to all of those from the VSOs that are here. This hearing today, it doesn't substitute for the ongoing dialogue that we have with you. You inform the work that we do in Washington, and we encourage you to continue working with us and to work with our district staff. And in our district office, we've got a veteran, Andy Ortega, who's here somewhere. You can raise your hand, Andy. So if anybody has complaints, you can direct. No, I'm kidding. But no, we're here to help, and we do a ton of veterans casework out of our Oceanside office. So very grateful for that work. We've got a really terrific first panel with some real leading experts locally, and I'd like to just very briefly introduce everybody. First is Dr. Robert Smith, the director of the San Diego VA healthcare system, doing an outstanding job serving our veterans here locally. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have gotten to see what you do firsthand, and I'm grateful for your being here this morning, for all you do for our veteran community. Assistant Secretary Hunter Kurtz, thanks for coming out from Washington. You join us from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, where you oversee the public and Indian housing program. Thanks for being here. My friend, San Diego County Supervisor Nathan Fletcher, you are a true leader in our community. I'm grateful to work with you on a whole host of issues. Thank you also for your service in the Marine Corps, and thank you for everything you've done specifically on the issue of veteran homelessness in San Diego. And finally, Ms. Ginny Puttyfoot, Executive Officer of the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it very much. Great panel. Want to get right to it. All of you will have 5 minutes. Your full statement will be added to record. But with that, Dr. Smith, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Levin, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and Congressman Peters. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the topic of veteran homelessness, the challenges faced by homeless women veterans, and the risk factors and unique challenges faced by homeless veterans with respect to nutrition, employment, and criminal justice. The VA San Diego healthcare system serves veterans throughout San Diego and Imperial counties. Our facilities include the Medical Center in La Jolla, community clinics throughout the region, and the Aspire Center, a unique residential treatment program for PTSD and mild TBI. In 2018, we provided care for approximately 85,000 veterans through nearly 1 million outpatient visits, including approximately 110,000 visits conducted at the Oceanside Clinic. As a Complexity 1A healthcare system, we provide a wide array of medical, surgical, mental health, and advanced rehabilitation services. The January 2019 point-in-time count reported a total of 8,102 homeless individuals, of which 1,068, or 13%, identified as veterans. Of those, 624 were sheltered and 424 were unsheltered. The total number of homeless veterans in the region decreased by 18% from 2018, and the unsheltered veteran count decreased by 35%. And I'd like to compliment my staff as well as our community partners on their efforts to make that occur. Since 2011, the overall number of homeless veterans in the region has decreased by 35%. The same 2019 count identified 483 homeless individuals in the city of Oceanside. We estimate that 63 of those are veterans. VA San Diego currently has 97 staff within the various homeless programs, including 52 and a half who are assigned specifically to HUD-VASH. We have 1,824 HUD-VASH vouchers allocated, and 1,411 veterans are permanently housed using those vouchers. Our staff connect homeless veterans to a wide variety of services, including the HUD-VASH program, grants and per diem programs, and adjunctive programs such as supportive services for veteran families, rapid rehousing, and homeless prevention. The team manages an array of homeless veteran outreach programs through street and clinic-based services. These include staff assigned to the Veterans Bridge Shelter, our Justice Outreach Program, or field work with community partners. Identification of homelessness is also embedded in our primary care and mental health programs, where veterans receiving care are regularly screened for homelessness or risk factors for homelessness. VA San Diego enjoys a robust relationship with our community partners. Our staff serve on the Regional Task Force on the Homeless and collaborate with the Coordinated Entry System. Our Homeless Program Director chairs the monthly meetings of the Regional Veterans Consortium, which includes providers and community partners seeking to end veteran homelessness. Our homeless program and suicide prevention staff collaborate with our community partners to provide training and to assure that case management staff can address the needs of veterans in crisis. They meet regularly to discuss and develop treatment plans for high-risk veterans. Our Homeless Veterans Community Employment Services Program connects veterans to local employers and assists veterans through individual and group services to access competitive employment. The 2019 point-in-time count also identified 83 homeless women veterans. Providing service and support to homeless women veterans is a priority for us. We provide services to women veterans in the grant and per diem programs, including those located at Interfaith Community Services in Oceanside and Veterans Villages of San Diego, or VVSD. The local Veterans Bridge Shelter operated by VVSD provides dedicated shelter beds to women veterans. VA San Diego staff have close relationships with the shelter and assist with immediate referrals for women veterans. Our homeless program staff collaborate closely with our women's veteran programs overall to provide access to tailored health care services. We have approximately 10,000 women veterans currently enrolled with us, and we provide a full range of services, including dedicated women's health providers in all of our community clinics, gynecological specialists on staff, and strong maternity care programs through our DoD partners and the community, as well as any needed mental health services, including military sexual trauma and intimate partner violence prevention programs. Food insecurity among veterans is also a priority for us. VA San Diego partners with the San Diego Food Bank and other community agencies to address the needs of veterans. VA San Diego is committed to providing the high-quality care our veterans have earned and deserve. We continue to improve access and services to meet the needs of all veterans. We are committed to working with our community partners to end homelessness among veterans. We support all efforts to increase homeless veteran HUD-VASH prioritization eligibility. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today and the resources Congress provides the VA to care for veterans. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I'm prepared to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. I appreciate that. Assistant Secretary Kurtz, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, both Chairman, Ranking Member, and Congressman Peters, for this opportunity to discuss the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's efforts to end veterans' homelessness. This is actually my first hearing since I've been confirmed, and I can't think of a better issue to have that be. HUD is committed to ending veteran homelessness by working collaboratively with our partners and maximizing the effectiveness of all existing resources. Since 2010, there has been an overall decline of 49% in veterans homelessness, and to date, 77 communities and 3 states have effectively ended veterans homelessness. Thanks to funding from Congress and close collaboration among federal and local partners, the nation continues to make progress in reducing veterans homelessness and creating sustainable federal and local systems that quickly respond to veterans' housing needs in the future. I'm honored to serve as HUD's Assistant Secretary for Public and Indian Housing, the office that administers the HUD Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, or HUD-VASH. In the HUD-VASH program, local housing authorities and local VA medical centers work collaboratively to provide homes and critical services to some of the most vulnerable veterans. I'm a houser at heart, and I can attest that this program has been successful in providing a home, not just a house, to our nation's veterans. The HUD-VASH program has been a very successful tool in addressing veterans' homelessness. Since 2008, HUD has awarded over 97,000 HUD-VASH vouchers to PHAs across the country. These vouchers have helped over 174,000 veterans move into housing. There are currently over 76,000 veterans that are in housing due to HUD-VASH vouchers. This partnership between HUD and the VA has been a model of interagency collaboration, both at the headquarters level and on the ground. Currently, the housing authorities in California who administer VASH vouchers are providing housing opportunities to 15,000 formerly homeless veterans. In Los Angeles County, there are 6,540 homeless veterans counted in 2009. This latest point-in-time count has demonstrated a reduction of 41% in veteran homelessness from a decade ago. Local agencies such as the San Diego Housing Commission continue to engage in collaborative efforts with their local partners to seek innovative solutions to address homelessness. The restoration of the Hotel Churchill, a historic landmark hotel located in the heart of downtown San Diego, is one such example of the life-changing results that come out of locally based collaborations. Built in 1914, the Hotel Churchill had become a vacant and abandoned property when the SDHC acquired it in 2011. After a $20.6 million restoration and rehabilitation, the Hotel Churchill became repurposed as a 72-unit affordable permanent supportive housing development, with 56 of those units dedicated to formerly homeless veterans. Residents of the Hotel Churchill received on-site supportive services, including mental health, social and recreational services, and life skill courses, all to ensure their long-term success. In Los Angeles County, which has the largest VASH allocation nationwide, PHAs are engaging in a number of collaborative efforts to meet the serious challenges of operating within an extremely high-cost rental market. These include interjurisdictional agreements between PHAs to eliminate delays caused by portability and expand housing choice for veterans, adopting a standard PHA application form to reduce confusion for veterans and VA caseworkers, and working with local and county government to support landlord outreach and incentive programs. HUD and the VA are currently focused on changes to the allocation of new HUD-VASH vouchers and supporting PHAs in their effort to improve utilization. For example, HUD made changes to the eligibility criteria for the FY19 HUD-VASH allocation, only awarding additional HUD-VASH vouchers to those PHAs utilizing their existing resources. HUD believes it is critical that all existing HUD-VASH resources are being used as efficiently and effectively as possible to serve the maximum number of veterans across this country. A great deal of progress has been made over the years in the way HUD works with other agencies to address veterans' homelessness. The HUD-VASH program continues to be a model of interagency collaboration and one of the best tools for ending veterans' homelessness. We must continue to find ways to maximize the effectiveness of the HUD-VASH program while also assisting communities in utilizing all available homeless assistance resources. Thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss HUD's efforts to end veterans' homelessness and the improvements we are making to our program to achieve success. Thank you all.
Thank you, Secretary Kurtz, and I think we all look forward to working with you and with HUD in the months ahead. Appreciate your coming out, being here. With that, I'd like to recognize Supervisor Fletcher for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you having this hearing and having us here. I think you and I share the distinction of the elected officials in the room. We have the least seniority of anyone. We are the baby elected officials, having just been elected the last time. But I say that because I appreciate our first conversation we had post-election. You said, what can I do to help our veterans? This is an important issue, and I've joined you in your town halls on this issue, and I appreciate you having us. And Chairman Takano, thank you for your work on deported vets. I know for many years we worked together on that, and appreciate that. And then to my local member, Mr. Peters, thank you. I know for many, many years you've been standing up for us in San Diego, and for decades, in fact, going back. And so we're incredibly grateful for that. And Mr. Bilirakis, welcome to San Diego. We appreciate you being here. Spend lots of money. The weather is nice, and we're very grateful for you making the time on this issue. I just want to touch on briefly, in addition to being a member of the County Board of Supervisors, I sit on the Regional Task Force on Homeless on the board there where we work on these issues, and the governor recently asked me to join his statewide Homeless and Supportive Housing Task Force. Our first hearing is next month. And so we spend a lot of time addressing these issues, and I think we all share the same commitment. And certainly as someone who served, I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, it is always striking as a society that if we have the moral authority to send young men and women to war, then we have the moral obligation to care for them when they come back. And as a society, if we don't want to put forward the efforts at all levels of government to do that, then we can stop making combat veterans. But given there's always the funding available to fund the making of them, I appreciate the commitment to find the funding to make sure we take care of them on the back end. I think a lot has been said. You know, in San Diego, we have almost 250,000 veterans. About 10% of our region's active duty transition out every year. And has been talked about, there's issues surrounding the high cost of housing. There are issues surrounding the stigma of post-traumatic stress, the stigma of mental health injury, which often precludes veterans from getting the care that they need. And that provides a compounding situation, which leads us to the point where we have homeless veterans, despite tremendous effort and tremendous resources being put forward. And I just want to tackle one issue just quickly on the issue of behavioral health and mental health care, which is one of the largest things that stops veterans from getting it, is the stigma. The VA provides incredible care. I am the greatest possible fan of the VA. I get care at the VA. I've never had a bad experience at the VA. I don't know veterans who've had bad experiences at the VA. The problem is getting veterans to go to the VA and ask for care that they don't want anyone to know they have, which goes into the stigma issue. And if we don't tackle that, then the veterans won't access the available services. Their untreated mental health issues will lead to self-medication, often via substance abuse, which will then trigger a downward spiral into the issue of homelessness. And so I think that's a really important point. And I think efforts to counter any movement to try and privatize or outsource the VA are critical, because that is a safe place for us to go. We get culturally competent care from people who care about us and understand us. And I think the integrity of that needs to be maintained. The VASH voucher is the lifeline. And the federal government's commitment to that is essential, and I'm very appreciative to Congressman Peters and Mr. Levin for introducing legislation to protect that funding. Efforts to siphon money off for that, for other areas or things that can't go. And then a critical point, which was mentioned earlier, is making sure it's not just the VASH voucher, it's the case management that goes with it. We don't want to just shelter or warehouse people. We want them to get on a path to being better. One of the challenges we have in the local entity is how do we get landlords to be willing to accept this? We have an indescribably expensive rental market in San Diego County, which is compounded by a variety of factors at the state. We're looking at things we might do to try and control the rents. But we are launching landlord assistance programs through the county. We're providing leasing bonuses, application expenses, damage claim reimbursements, security, utility deposit assurances to try and get landlords to do their job to accept those vouchers. And I will certainly am open to any form of incentive or encouragement or perhaps pressure to try and make sure that we can do that. And that's something certainly that is on us to try and tackle. And then I think there's a variety of other areas that we can get into where we have to do more. Certainly TBI is an issue, not just PTS. San Diego County does not have a memory care veterans nursing homes. The state of California funds several of those in other areas, San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento Valley, West Los Angeles, Napa Valley. We have the Chula Vista Veterans Home, but it doesn't provide specific services for those who are suffering from dementia, and we know that TBI often leads and triggers into those issues. And so that's an area where we not only work with the federal government, but with the state government as well to see what else we may be able to do. But I'm incredibly grateful for this hearing and incredibly grateful for all of you as a veteran that you care and that you take the time to work on these. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor. We're grateful for you leading the way. With that, I'd like to recognize Ms. Puttyfoot for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Ginny Puttyfoot, and I'm the Executive Officer of the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. The council is under the California Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency and is chaired by Alexis Podesta, the Secretary of the agency. The California Department of Veterans Affairs, CalVet, is represented on the council by Undersecretary Russell Atterbury, who until January 2019 served as Vice Chair of the council. First, I'd like to give you a few facts and figures about homelessness and veterans homelessness in California. California, as you know, has 39.5 million residents, or about 12% of the nation's population. But it has 25% of the nation's homelessness, over 130,000 people. And I do want to point out that's based on the 2017 point-in-time count. We know the numbers have gone up since then. We have the largest number of veterans of any state, about 2 million. That's about 8.5% of the nation's veterans. But we have about 28% of the nation's homeless veterans, roughly 11,000. The homeless point-in-time count, the 2019 count occurred earlier this year. While the final numbers from HUD won't be available until the fall, the vast majority of local reporting agencies are reporting increases in their homeless populations. In contrast, we have seen progress in reducing veterans' homelessness. For example, Los Angeles County has reported an overall increase of 12% in its total number of homeless, but reported a slight drop in the number of homeless veterans since 2017. As I know we're in San Diego County, I do also, though, want to acknowledge our neighbor to the north, as Chairman Takana did, in being the first county in California to achieve functional zero when it comes to the number of homeless veterans. That means that homelessness among veterans in Riverside County is rare, brief, and non-recurring, and no veteran is forced to live on the street. There is clearly still a tremendous amount of work to do in addressing homelessness in general and veterans' homelessness specifically. Some of that work is underway through the state. In 2014, California voters approved Proposition 41, which created the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program and provided $600 million to fund it. It provides new affordable housing for veterans and their families, with an emphasis on developing housing for veterans who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. It places a priority on projects that combine housing and supportive services and encourages and fosters innovative financing by leveraging public, private, and nonprofit fiscal resources. The funding is administered by CalVet and the Department of Housing and Community Development in close consultation with the California Housing Finance Agency. To date, 17 projects comprising 546 units have been completed and are currently occupied by veterans. Another 47 projects comprising 1,772 units are in the pipeline. Last year, voters passed another ballot measure, Proposition 1, the Housing Programs and Veterans Loan Bond. Proposition 1 authorized $4 billion in bonds, including $1 billion for the CalVet Home Loan Program. The CalVet Home Loan Program provides loans with below-market interest rates with low or no down payment requirements. Nearly all California veterans are eligible for this program. The voters also approved Proposition 2, which allows revenue from 2004's Proposition 63 to be utilized for housing programs. Specifically, this funding will fund the No Place Like Home program, which provides $2 billion in funding for development of permanent supportive housing for people who are in need of mental health services and who are experiencing homelessness, chronic homelessness, or who are at risk of chronic homelessness. And the process for getting that money out the door is underway. More immediately, in the 2018 and 2019 Budget Acts, a total of $1.1 billion was appropriated to provide flexible block grant funding to local jurisdictions, specifically the largest cities, all of the counties, and the 44 continuums of care. These funds are designed to provide short-term assistance to local jurisdictions until the longer-term programs are online. It can be used for a variety of services, including to address veterans' homelessness. Thank you very much for the chance to participate in this hearing this morning.
Thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody for their opening statements. I'd now like to recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the questioning, and I'd like to begin with Supervisor Fletcher. I want to thank you again for your service to our country, and now your service on the Board of Supervisors, as well as your time in the state legislature, and particularly on the clear and pressing issue that we're talking about today, veteran homelessness. And I was wondering, before we dive into specific solutions, we're going to be hearing from a lot of people as well in the second panel who are out there in the field working on these issues every day. Could you paint a picture for the hearing record and for our benefit of the current state of veteran homelessness as you see it in San Diego, and anything we should know about the veteran population that is homeless?
No, thank you for that. I think when we look at, a number of folks have alluded to kind of recent numbers and kind of point-in-time count. In that recent point-in-time count, which is just a snapshot, it's not a total picture, it doesn't encapsulate the entirety of the problem. It's one morning and one day. We identified in that 1,100 people who were identified as veterans. Now, out of those, 653 were in a shelter. So they were sheltered and they were housed and they were covered. 448 were unsheltered. That is a 32% decrease from the point-in-time count the year before. And there's other data that suggests in San Diego County it is going down and getting better. I think from my perspective and where I sit, I think the biggest challenge that we face, again, is getting landlords who are willing to accept those VASH vouchers. We just got we have an ad hoc measurements committee at the RTFH where we're really looking at system metrics of how we can hold ourselves accountable for what we want. And the number of veterans who have a voucher but are not utilizing that voucher is of great concern to me, because that's where you all are doing your job to provide the resources and provide the funding, and we have to do our job to do that. Now, again, I alluded to the fact that the rental market is incredibly tight. We have NIMBY challenges in terms of siting new facilities and siting new housing. We have a challenge with app-based home rental. We have vacancy issues with foreign wealth funds buying floors and new towers. We have a lot of things that are contributing to that. But we have to find a way to crack this nut to make sure that that veteran who has that voucher has a place to go. Because when we have challenges in general in homeless, we don't have similar programs where someone will pay to house somebody. And so this ought to be the easiest problem to solve. And so that's where I think we have to move swiftly to identify available land to build housing. At the county, we're doing an inventory of all of our housing. In my district, we have multiple projects going. We have 404 units going in Claremont. We're doing somewhere between 120 and 160 units in downtown, where we take government-owned land and build and then provide those services. And then I just want to go back and really tackle or really highlight, Mr. Chairman, what I think is a really important component, which is when we talk about the epidemic of veteran suicide, the most common refrain you see in the debate is, we'll fix the VA. Well, I've already alluded to, we can always make it better. We always can make everything better. But if you read the actual studies and the information, you'll see that somewhere north of 80% of veteran suicide never called the VA. They never called the VA. And had they called the VA, they would have got world-class care. The reason they didn't call is because of the stigma associated with it. So if you think about in our society, two Marines are in combat side by side. One gets nicked with shrapnel, no scar, no lasting impact, right? They get a medal, and we honor them for their sacrifice. The veteran right beside him has devastating post-traumatic stress from the exact same combat experience, and they don't get anything. We, as a society, still have a stigma around the unseen wounds of war that is preventing veterans when they transition out from getting help. Getting that help is what will keep them housed and keep them employed and keep them in a life of purpose. And so we have to deal with the downstream issue of those who are suffering, get them substance abuse treatment, get them mental health treatment. The efforts to help those regardless of their discharge status is vital, and we got to get landlords to accept. We got to cite more housing to get those services there. But I really think tackling the stigma on the front end is a national issue that is of paramount importance. Because again, in so many populations, the problem we have is they don't have access to behavioral health services. Veterans have access to the services. We just got to get them to ask for it. And so I just think that is a really important component as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I have questions for all the rest of you as well. So if it's okay with my colleagues, we'll go ahead and do 2 rounds for this panel before we move on to the second panel. So with that, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it very much. And I want to thank the panel. From your point of view at the local level, what is the one message or need that we need to take back to Washington that would make your job easier or would reduce homelessness among veterans? I think that's the bottom line. Why don't we start with you, sir, if you don't mind.
Thank you for that question, Congressman Bilirakis. I think I would say affordability may be the one word. Our biggest challenge is, as Supervisor Fletcher said, is often in finding affordable housing for the veterans that need it. Certainly, I think there are other challenges in reaching out to veterans and making them come forward, becoming aware of all of them, but that would probably be the single largest challenge.
Can I ask you a question, again, for the panel, and I know I want everyone to answer the first question, but why do you think we have a high percentage of homeless veterans here in California as opposed to some of these other states? Is it the climate? Are they natives, or do they move here? Is it because of the cost of living? Why do you think that's the case? Because it sounds like you guys are doing and gals are doing a great job. And I know we have the funding. We can always increase the funding, put an emphasis on veterans with HUD as well, which, I'd like to ask that question. But yeah, what do you think, Mr. Smith? What do you think, Dr. Smith? Why do you think there's such a higher percentage here in California? I know we have more veterans here in California. There's no question. I think Florida's number 3, but California's number 1 with regard to vets.
I would probably say, Congressman, yes to all of your suggestions. I think it is multifactorial. It is the climate. It is the fact that San Diego and Southern California is welcoming to veterans. I think there is, at times, economic opportunities here that people seek. California is often viewed as the land of opportunity. And many veterans have served in Southern California at different times and remember the area fondly. And so they may come back here seeking services. And there is a reputation that we and others have of providing help to them, so they may be coming seeking help as well.
Okay. Yes, sir.
To your first question?
Yeah,
I would
that'd be
say,
fine,
I would start off with, we also have a program, the Tribal HUD-VASH program, that deals with Native American populations, and that has not been permanently authorized. On the second question, I would say, probably, as Dr. Smith said, sort of yes to everything, but definitely affordable housing issues, as well as this is my first time in Southern California, and I think the climate would be.
Yeah, it's very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, last night I felt like I was outside and I thought it was in indoors in air conditioning. So it's very pleasant.
Thank you. I don't think, I've yet to be convinced by data that veterans shop for the best place to be homeless. I think the climate is very nice. I think, and we certainly have a lot of veterans here, and we have a lot of folks who served here and want to stay here, but we have a disproportionate number of homeless compared to the percentage of veterans, which indicates to me that there's something else that's going on there, and I think it simply goes back to the cost of housing. Our cost of housing is astronomically high. I was recently in Kansas, and if you're a veteran in Topeka, Kansas, you can use your VAST voucher. Someone will take it. There will be a housing that will be there. The other challenge that we face in California is as we confront the issues of wildfires, of climate change, of carbon emissions, of vehicle miles traveled, the challenge for us to increase our supply of housing is to increase our density in existing areas of housing. And so everyone wants you to build housing as long as you don't build it anywhere near them. Well, the problem is you can't build housing that isn't near somebody. And so because there's nowhere to go where you can do it and still meet the other goals we have. And I'll give you a specific example. I think it was 3 years ago. I look up exactly. We had a affordable housing project that was going in the city of Poway. Wonderful folks, love their country, love their veterans. It was 11 units. I mean, it was all of 11 units. And traffic was mitigated, everything was taken care of, and we had more veterans on the waiting list than spots available. But the opposition to that was outrageous. And community opposition killed 11 units that all would have gone to veterans with the promise that they would bring it back in the right spot. And here we spent 3 years later, those 11 units have not been brought back. And so we have a challenge that we have to overcome as policymakers of addressing legitimate community concerns, making sure things work with traffic and all those issues and safety, and then saying at the end of the day, we have to build this housing. And I don't think it's a disregard for veterans. It's just a disregard for veterans who have mental health issues or substance abuse issues or who are low income and have affordable housing, because those are the three categories of housing that no one wants near them. And so I think that there's a notion of, and I'll wrap up, there's a notion of, I've heard the analogy of it's like we have neighborhoods who say there's a leak in your side of the boat. Go fix it somewhere. Well, we're all in the boat together, and there has to be a collective sense that every neighborhood and every community is going to have to shoulder its share of the load in taking affordable housing, permanent supportive housing, behavioral health and substance abuse programs, and we can design them in a way that preserves the integrity of the neighborhood. But that's a fight we have here in San Diego, and I'm constantly engaging with community groups where they say, well, we don't want these folks here. And I said, but those folks are there now. They're in your canyons, they're in your alleys, they're on the streets. So let's get them in a clean, safe environment for a better thing. And so we just have to have the courage to push those through.
Agreed. Thank you. I yield back. I know we have another round.
We'll have another round, and with that, I'd like to recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. Supervisor, I want us to delve more into this topic because it's not just here in San Diego. I was talking to one of the LA County supervisors, and this particular supervisor was telling me stunning stories about projects, housing projects specifically designed to help veterans. And this supervisor was just astounded at the virulent opposition. And I was, I understand, Riverside was one of the places in the 1980s that rapidly developed, and I understand the backlash that communities can have against developments, rapid development. I can understand what, say, high-density developments that have a low-income element to it. People in single-family homes, detached homes, will rally and say, we don't want poor people in our community. So, and I think this is playing out all over various communities in California. And but I was, the goodwill toward veterans, and as I think you say, it's veterans with substance abuse challenges, veterans that this is what the community gets wind of, and then they rise up. What do you think? Do you have more further thought? I mean, you're new to this, but I think this is, I think supervisors and county and city council people, the people who have to make these land use decisions, have the hardest job, really.
Well, no, and I think a lot about this. This dominates a lot of my thought, both as a supervisor who has land use authority. Now, in the unincorporated areas is where we have less opportunity, but as someone who delves on these issues, but also as someone, the governor also appointed me to the California Air Resources Board. We were tasked with meeting our greenhouse gas emission targets and goals. And so we have these conflicting goals of we have to significantly increase the availability of housing, not just for veterans, not just for those who are homeless, but you got folks that are working. I mean, you have folks that are working a full-time job and living in their car. And so we have to increase the housing there. And so the notions, the intersection, I believe, Mr. Chairman, is the intersection of transportation and housing. So part of this is community opposition. We have to design projects. We have to put together things that we know are going to work, right? We can't have a devastating project. We can't put a 100-story tower in the middle of a residential area and it would be devastating, it would be bad. We have to design them in a way that mitigates legitimate community concerns. And then we have to have the courage to overcome pure NIMBYism against people because they are low income or they are suffering from an illness or an addiction, right? And that is on us because we're going to be held accountable for not addressing the problem. And so you're going to get grief there. I think we have to be willing to take the grief to address the problem. But the other component of this, particularly in California, is issues surrounding transit and transportation. And so where we have the greatest potential and opportunity for growth is in the urban areas where we do urban infill and we increase density. Now, because of the challenges we face with vehicle miles traveled, up over 1 billion in San Diego County in the last 10 years. Although we hit our 2020 climate change goals, we are not on track statewide to hit our 2030 goals. In fact, we're going in the wrong direction. And so the only way we're going to do that is by changing the way we approach transportation to have an actual investment in transit in areas where we have density of housing and density of employment. And if you can do that, then you can start to alleviate some of the traffic issues, some of the greenhouse gas issues, some of the parking issues. But again, that requires a fundamental change in thinking, of rethinking. It's not just about expanding freeways, which we know in induced demand only increases congestion. It's about getting us, even a small percentage of those folks, out of those into transit. And so I think the intersection of transportation and housing is vital to tackling this issue broadly and getting communities to realize that we can add this and it's not going to increase your local congestion. And then some of this is just a change of mindset. We have to go out and make the case for why these programs are important, why they are. And then sometimes we have to do the difficult work of you have 17 folks from a neighborhood and they're really upset, but there's 17 of them. You know, this is the project I have in Claremont. I got 404 units going in. And so we have to, at a certain point, do everything we can to build consensus and coalitions and get people to buy in. And then at a certain point, we got to pull the trigger and we got to approve things. And we have to be willing to take that and go out and explain for why that's in our collective interest and good. And so some of it is overcoming community opposition, and some of it is folks in my situation being willing to make the difficult decisions. And then the last point I'll say on this is there's been a great debate in the state of California at the legislative level about who really should have land use authority. We saw Senator Wiener introduce legislation that in many ways would take that away from local entities, right, and create more by right development in areas where the development is right. And my message to local governments, and it's heresy for a local government person to say this, but if we can't get the job done, then maybe they should take it away. If local governments can't figure out how to approve the housing that we need in appropriate areas, right, then perhaps we shouldn't be the ones tasked. There's nothing written, you know, in society that we're the only ones that have land use. And so I think that continual pressure that you see from the governor here in terms of suing local jurisdictions for not hitting their RHNA targets, and in terms of the legislature, in terms of looking at very controversial changes to how we zone and land use, I think are very important conversations that have to be had, but have to lead to an increase in density.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Representative Peters for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually, as the supervisor was speaking, I actually wrote down Poway on my note before you got to me, because that was sort of the illustration of one of the challenges, which is you had a community that you would suspect would be supportive of veterans, but they all came out against this 11 unit. You know, 11 units is not 10,000 units. And I think frankly, with the unwillingness of the local electeds to do what you said, Supervisor, which is to stand up to that, was really shocking, but not uncommon. And I would just add, I think that it's clear that one of the biggest, maybe the biggest challenges for us in homelessness in San Diego is the cost of housing in general. More supply will lower the cost of housing. And I agree with what you said, except that I think in the gap is something we call the Environmental Quality, the California Environmental Quality Act, which empowers single individuals to file lawsuits against projects, even if they have nothing to do with the environment, even if they're on surface parking lots, have nothing to do with sensitive resources. That's got to be cut back so that local elected officials can do their jobs and be empowered and not be disempowered or undercut by lawsuits by literally one or two disgruntled people. I think we have not come to grips with that, and if the state would take one action, short of taking away land use authority, is empower local elected officials to do what you said. Let's give them the chance to do the right kind of development, to build more housing in a way not just that preserves the neighborhoods, but improves them through investment. So I certainly agree with you. And Supervisor Fletcher, we're lucky to have you in this position with your background and with your history of fighting for these issues. I do want to ask specifically, I'm going to get to you, Ms. Puttyfoot, with the same kind of question, is what is it Congress can do to bolster these programs for veterans, especially those with chronic homelessness? What do you think are the priorities we should take back for this committee and in general for Congress?
Sure.
Well, I'm clearly not an expert on veteran homelessness, but I can speak briefly about the chronic homelessness issue. I think that's one reason that the state has put an emphasis on the development of permanent supportive housing. We know that there's a need for housing that is combined with services that are tailored to an individual and are not time limited, and that provide an opportunity for whether it's veterans or other chronically homeless individuals to receive the ongoing support they need to stay housed. I think one of the things that we haven't touched on here is that it's much more cost effective to keep people housed than it is to address them once they're homeless. And so, when we're looking at this from our perspective and being tasked with looking at ways to reduce the overall numbers of homeless in California generally, one of the areas that we're really focusing on is rapid rehousing or diversion before homelessness actually occurs.
Those are programmatic suggestions, or descriptions of what California's doing. The implication, I think, is that you want us to continue funding or increase funding from the federal government. Is that it? Is that your answer?
You put me in a little bit of an awkward spot given my position here, but I think definitely funding is at the heart. Programs follow funding.
Can I just ask a specific question about the California response to leveraging resources like the low-income housing tax credit? We understand that lost a little value with the tax plan that Congress passed, the President's tax plan in 2017, I guess. Because there's not as much to write off against it. Can you tell us if there's ways you think that program can be improved from the perspective of housing California's homeless?
I'm not versed, unfortunately, in that, and can't address that. I will say that in addition to funding, one of the most important areas, whether it's federal, state, or local, is to really align programs and supports and funding. I think that collaborative process to sort of minimize the administrative burden on local jurisdictions is really critical.
Okay,
and that's one reason we provided flexible block grant funding.
Supervisor Fletcher, maybe 30 seconds.
Yeah, one thing I think from Congress that would be incredibly helpful, there is tremendous instability in general in the federal government. It's not from your branch of government, and it's not from the Supreme Court. And so I think, but the problem is we're dealing in markets, and we're asking people to make long-term commitments to build projects. We're asking them to make long-term commitments to site property, and the instability is a real problem. And so knowing that the VASH voucher will be there, it will be funded, it will be protected. Knowing that these HUD programs will be there, they will be funded, they will be protected, is a really important thing that sends signals when I go to folks and say we need to do this. And when there's all of this instability, people don't know day to day what will happen. It makes it hard. And none of these problems will solve themselves quickly. And so I just think that continued commitment to the HUD funding, not just veterans housing, all their housing programs, because we're cobbling things together to try and make them work. And that's where I think the Congress in a bipartisan way can be that source of stability to say these are things we're going to fight to protect and ensure will be there. And that's a specific thing that would be helpful to us at the local level.
Okay, thank you. Yield back.
Wanted to thank you for that because it's a perfect segue to what I'm about to ask. I'm going to recognize myself again for 5 more minutes. I wanted to ask about HUD-VASH specifically, and wanted to start with Secretary Kurtz. In your testimony, I noted that you mentioned HUD did not request new HUD-VASH vouchers in fiscal year 2020 because the 2019 funding was enough to meet the demand of current referrals. Would we be correct to interpret that as meaning more HUD-VASH voucher funding would not increase the number of veterans served? And if that's the case, can you explain?
Sure. At this point, actually, HUD has not requested additional HUD-VASH funding since, I believe it was fiscal year 2015. And we believe that there is sufficient funding currently across the nation, that we just need to sort of work to utilize what funding is there currently to ensure that we and the VA are working working together to house the veterans, as well as we are looking at flexibility such as we've taken are allowing VA medical centers, the regions that they cover, we can switch vouchers from one public housing authority to another in that area. And if need to, we have not yet, but we are looking at possibly even moving funding at a broader scale if need be.
So I wanted to address that. As I understand it, community agencies refer veterans to HUD-VASH through the coordinated entry system. Is it possible that the community partners are unable to refer more individuals due to their own capacity limits? And if that's the case, how do we address that issue?
Actually, that's a really interesting question because I have, before I came back to HUD, I worked at the local level and worked with, one of the programs I worked with was HUD-VASH. And we were concerned about issues like that and actually just sort of brought everyone together, the VA, our local partners, myself, folks in the city as well as the local housing authority, and try to work out strategies to ensure that we were coordinating better. It's a collaboration and a communication that we need to ensure is taking place at the local level. And we saw success after that happened.
Thank you. I'd like to switch from HUD to VA and to talk about VA funding for intake and for case management. My understanding is HUD-VASH eligible veterans are often chronically homeless. They have severe health problems and they require intensive services and support. Dr. Smith, can you discuss any challenges your staff face in serving this population and any additional resources that they may need and therefore that you may need at the VA?
Thank you, Chairman Levin. You are correct that the population that are served by HUD-VASH vouchers can be challenging. They represent individuals who may be chronically homeless, but also often have disability, mental illness, substance use, and simply reaching them can be challenging. We have both intake staff as well as HUD-VASH case managers that are working continuously to reach out into areas where veterans may be. We have 5 outreach staff currently, and 3 of those are field-based, sometimes working with San Diego Police Department or Oceanside Police Department to actually go out into areas where veterans might be living in an encampment or in some other non-habitable situation. So part of our program is involved in outreach, and then there's also an intake part. That intake part sometimes can be challenging, again, because it requires typically a face-to-face visit with a veteran that takes some time. There may be documents that are unavailable, and that intake process sometimes can be a delay in getting the voucher packet to the PHA and then to getting the veteran housed. We have at different times had staffing issues. I'm happy to say that we are right now staffed up and able to process those vouchers.
I wanted to ask a follow-up. I was struck by Supervisor Fletcher's previous comment that the biggest challenge is getting landlords willing to take VASH vouchers. My understanding is that there are several incentives that the county offers to landlords to accept those VASH vouchers. Trying to understand from the supervisor or from Dr. Smith, where does that funding originate and is it sufficient? Is it a matter of more funding needed to secure housing and to get more landlords willing to take these vouchers? And either of you or both of you can feel free to address that.
Well, we take that funding from our general fund. That's county general purpose money that we could spend on anything, and we dedicate it to that. We try to cobble together it wherever we can get it from. And that really is key, because we're trying to overcome that barrier. You know, if that landlord can rent it to somebody for more money and they aren't homeless, they don't have a problem, they're more likely to do that. And so it's a real challenge for us. And I think the efforts to address the value of the VASH voucher in high-cost areas are really important, because we have a high-cost area and we're trying to address that. But, you know, potentially having that is really important. If there were funding available to help increase these incentives, that is a greater tool that we have. That's where we're giving them bonuses for taking them. We're providing insurance if they damage anything. We're guaranteeing the utilities will be paid. We're just trying to get them comfortable with being willing to do it. And so that is an area where some jurisdictions provide those incentives, some don't. Some do what they can, but they could always do more. And then I think the flexibility around housing authorities is very important. At the county, we are the housing authority for the unincorporated area, and we're the housing authority for 13 of the 18 incorporated jurisdictions within the county. But you have San Diego, Oceanside, Carlsbad, Encinitas, and National City have their own housing authorities. They get their own VASH vouchers. And so the abilities, the greater flexibility there is almost always good. And so I would say high-cost areas is a really important area to view those as distinct and different, particularly when they have more severe levels of veteran homelessness. I think the incentive programs and potential funding to augment or increase incentives. Obviously, you don't want folks to cut back commitments they've already made because it comes, but if they could increase what they're already doing, and the flexibility are three things that I think would be helpful. And then I just want to reemphasize the case management piece is vital, because we've also had a very big problem with we get them housed and then they don't stay housed, right? Because they're having all of these issues, and that case manager is that person who's going to work them through. They're going to work them through the system. They're going to stick with them. They're going to stay with them. They're going to check on them. They're going to encourage them. And, you know, when you encounter folks that are suffering chronic homelessness, it takes a lot of visits and a lot of patience. This is very, very, very hard work to get someone to transform their life. And so that case management supportive role, the goal is not just to get them in a place with the VASH voucher where they have an unstable, unpredictable, unhealthy life. I mean, that's better than being on the street. But then we got to figure out how we get them there, and that's where that case management piece is vital.
Appreciate it, Supervisor. I want to make sure that we move along fairly quickly. We want to get to our second panel. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Bilirakis for a second round of questions for our first panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Putterfoot, what best practices can other counties in the state take away, or even in the nation? What best practices can we take away from Riverside County to reach the goal of functional zero for veteran homelessness? And I'm going to give the chairman partial credit for that. It represents the county, so outstanding. What best practices can we take away?
Well, I really could defer to the chairman here, but from what we've observed, there was a real collaboration and coming together of all of the different organizations and entities that touch on veteran care, veteran housing, to really provide that comprehensive approach, but also to tailor it individually and to take into account, as Supervisor Fletcher mentioned, the specific needs for case management and provide that on an ongoing basis. The other thing that I know Riverside County has done is use the data that is collected through the Homeless Management Information System to really provide some feedback and some rigorous analytics about what is working within their communities and where the gaps are. And I think if we could replicate that, we're currently at the agency level really looking into how the state could encourage all local jurisdictions to have access to the kind of data and analytics. We've seen that being effective not only in Riverside, but also in Santa Clara County and Los Angeles and elsewhere. So it's that collaborative piece of bringing everyone to the table, which in some places is really happening, but in a lot of jurisdictions, it's still very siloed, which means that all the right people are not in the room to make it happen.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to add anything to that?
You know, just that I've worked our office has worked with the county, and the county is a really key player, because it's actually a county statistic. And two very empowered people within that, within the county staff had, you know, the authority and the just the sheer energy to dedicate themselves to this. And they're really now, as is so often the case with working on veterans issues, veterans are not necessarily all that much different in their challenges than the general population. And so they're ready to apply the things they've learned on how to effectively reach veterans, how to provide, how to plan for the case management. I do believe they also did a lot of work with landlords on the incentive side. So they're a little frustrated now because they need the resources to deal with the general homeless population. And so they're kind of armed with the basic learnings that they have gleaned from working on this veterans issue.
Very good, thank you. I guess I have a little more time, Mr. Chairman. I won't take it all. Who wants to answer this question? What role does substance abuse play in hindering success for the chronically homeless, and which programs should be invested in to address this issue? So important, and it's all linked together, whether it's mental health or substance abuse with regard to homelessness. And that's not always the case, but who would like to address that?
I'll talk very
Okay.
briefly on this. You
Please.
can't talk about mental health and substance abuse as separate issues. They're one issue. The co-occurring rates of both of those are in the 80s and 90s. The overwhelming majority of folks who are homeless who have a substance abuse problem arrived at that problem by self-medicating an undiagnosed and untreated mental health issue. If we just deal with the mental health, they're still addicted. If we just deal with the addiction, they're still that. And so we got to view it in the context of behavioral health, which means medication for addiction treatment. It works. I mean, the data is irrefutable that it works. And then there's controversial things like needle exchange that save lives, promote public health, help get people clean. And some of these are uncomfortable or difficult, but all of the healthcare data suggests this is the way we address it. And so I think substance abuse is a cornerstone is in terms of addressing this challenge we face.
Very good. Anyone else?
I would just add that in California, we adopted legislation to really require funded housing by the state to adopt housing first principles, which include low barrier and a prohibition against refusing to provide housing or housing-based services for someone solely because they have behavioral health issues. And so that really, it's been research-based, evidence-based best practice around making sure that people are housed in order to provide effective support for dealing with behavioral health issues.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Chairman Takano for a second round of questions.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. Dr. Smith, you know, while the VA's budget is at record levels, we are still seeing needs across the agency for all services. Meanwhile, our committee really regularly hears from NGOs or in other words, private companies who offer their own solutions for homelessness in Southern California. What is the process and capacity for VA to accept outside funding to address the homeless challenge? Is there a process?
Congressman, I'm afraid I would have to take that one for the record because that's not something that I work a lot on locally. The bulk of the funding is managed out of the central office programs who put out requests for grants, notices of funding applications.
So you're not really prepared to talk about private-public partnerships in this area of
Well,
homelessness?
I'm not prepared to talk about funding for them. I would say that those private-public partnerships are very important, and particularly the work that we do with partners here. I would point out to some of the panelists, the second half, Veterans Villages of San Diego, Interfaith, and so forth.
So my questions might be addressed to the second panel, is what you're
Perhaps,
saying.
sir.
Okay. You know, the transition process is something that our committee has been deeply involved with, and Chairman Levin and Ranking Member Bilirakis and a number of our committee members are Mr. Cisneros, from Orange County. They're all particularly attuned to trying to improve this transition process. So I want to switch gears a little bit from the importance of wraparound services for chronic homelessness. I think it's really important to emphasize that for our chronic homeless population, as the supervisor said, it's a lot of work and a lot of resources to support people in getting their lives in order. But on the front end, trying to help veterans transition smoothly to avoid paying out large amounts of unemployment insurance. It seems to me that we could do a better job on the front end. And I know that Camp Pendleton has the Skills Bridge program that I've been hearing the VA ramp up across the country. That is something that I find very promising. Can you, I'd like to ask what we should be doing, what we should be sharing with service members to ensure that they don't find themselves homeless, and how we can improve the transition process.
Thank you for that question, Congressman. Certainly the transition, area of transition is critical. In San Diego, we have a robust transition program where we're really reaching out, particularly in working with the medical treatment facilities to accept those who have been identified as having needs at the time of separation from the service. But I think, as you point out, there's a large cadre of active duty military who separate without, for a variety of reasons, either knowing as much as they might about VA services or perhaps just not feeling like it was time for them. One of the complaints I often get when I'm out in the community is veterans that either don't know about the VA or feel like they weren't told about the VA at the time of their separation from active duty. So I think that is an area that we are all committed to improving. I certainly know that there's work going on at a national level to try and change or to assist in that, so that we have really a continuous process of reaching out to veterans to make them aware of veteran services that are available to them.
Supervisor, you look like you have something to say about this.
Well, I think the efforts on the job stuff is really good. There's funded programs. They can do it while they're on active duty, while they're getting off. I think all of that's good. I think that's improved significantly. I got out a decade ago. One thing that struck me when I was in, and perhaps it's been addressed, is you have a lot of service members who get out and have no idea what they want to do next because they never thought about it. They never thought about it. And it always struck me when I was in the Marine Corps, every year I went to the career planner. And the career planner, we'd have our counseling session about my Marine Corps career. Where did I want to go? What did I want to be assigned? What job? What duty? What term of enlistment? And it would be interesting, folks in DOD would know better, but perhaps when they join in boot camp, there's just someone who asks them a question, hey, how long do you think you want to stay in? And what do you think you want to do when you get out? Right? And then they write it down. And then the next year when they go to the career planner, someone says, hey, you said you wanted to stay in for life. How long do you think you want to stay in? What do you think you might want to do when you get out? And if we did that every year with a veteran, just what do you think you want to do when you get out? Because otherwise they get discharged and then they're just wandering. And then there's all these programs and services, but now they're disconnected from that period out, and they're not in a mindset of having a plan for what they want to do. And so perhaps that's been addressed in recent years.
Well,
but
Supervisor, I mean, there's been some work done in this area. Let me just, over time, but let me just say that I've always thought from day one there should be educational or training goals established, and their commanding officers should also be part of the process of holding those soldiers accountable every year. So it's a longer discussion, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Peters, I'd like to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on that last point, there is a good model in San Diego County that's developed called 0800, I know you're familiar with, which actually, in which the Navy allows the community effectively to go onto the base as they go through that dump of documents that they used to call TAPS, now they call GPS, to try to engage young people. We could talk more about that later. We think that's a pretty good response. Ms. Puttyfoot, you mentioned the continuum of care funding, and I want to just go back to that. Now, that's not specifically related to veterans, but because in San Diego, such a high proportion of our veterans are homeless, are veterans, it's important to us. Shortly after I took office, there was reporting in the Voice of San Diego to the effect that San Diego consistently had fourth or fifth highest numbers, absolute, of homeless people. But we were always about 18th to 23rd in the funding out of the continuum of care. Are you aware of that reporting?
I'm not specifically aware of that. I can say that the first round of flexible block grant funding, that was the $500 million that was part of the 2018 budget, gave not only funding to the continuums of care, but also to the 11 largest cities.
Right.
And so San Diego did get
That's a
funding.
California fund.
That's
Let me
California
just
funds.
make sure you
Yeah.
understand what I'm talking about, because we looked at that. Part of it has to do with the fact that there are some long-term commitments out of that funding. For instance, you know, we're going to spend for 10 years on this particular building, and that skews it somewhat. But, Mr. Kurtz, I understand that the continuum of care is not part of your direct responsibilities at HUD, is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. You mentioned, in the context of another program, the VASH vouchers, trying to get the most out of a consistent level of funding. I have to raise this with you because we think that, by the way, LA is being taken care of. We think that San Francisco is not falling behind. But the inequity of the funding to San Diego is something I would ask you to look at. It took a long time to make progress. But by the end of the Obama administration with Secretary Castro, we had identified 4 or 5 new approaches to this, a more fair formula, not based, believe it or not, on something like the age of the building stock as a proxy for the amount of homelessness you have. We would ask you to take a look at that, or ask the folks in HUD. Since the change of administration, the equities haven't changed. It's not a partisan issue. We just haven't heard anything about it. And so if we could just send you back with that message,
Absolutely.
that would be great. I guess I would just, we have to get on to the other panel, but I want to thank all the Dr. Smith, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about, you had a little answer on the Mr. Bilirakis' question on substance abuse, and you were cut off because of time, so I'll give you a chance to answer that question.
Thank you, Congressman Peters. I did want to mention some of the things that are going on. Ms. Puttyfoot mentioned low barrier approaches to accepting individuals who are homeless immediately into housing so that we're not requiring abstinence as a condition of housing. But I did also want to mention what Supervisor Fletcher talked about, which is medication-assisted therapy, which are available through the VA now as part of the approach. And it's also, there's a comprehensive effort going on throughout the VA on opioid reduction strategies. And we have this tension between individuals who may be having issues with addictions and at the same time working to reduce the usage of opioids across the board. We've been very successful at total opioid reduction usage here in San Diego by more than 50%. That's actually true nationally in the VA. So we've seen that approach. One of the really critical things is the availability of alternative therapies. So I'm happy to say that we do have a full complement of complementary and assistive therapies, such as use of yoga and Tai Chi, acupuncture, chiropractic therapy, which can be alternatives to the usage of substances of abuse.
Thank you. I just want to say, again, thanks to all of you for coming. We'd appreciate your advocacy on helping us with the continuum of care issue. If you could be aware of that, that'd be helpful. But thanks to all of you for what you're doing. And Mr. Kurtz, I hope you had a nice time in Southern California. And you'll tell your friends it's a nice place.
I have. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you all very much. I want to quickly transition to our second panel in the interest of everyone's time. So if we could have the panelists for panel number 2, please stand and come to the front. And again, to our panelists from the first panel, we're very grateful. We're going to jump right into it. Buddy, I'd now like to jump right in and welcome our second panel. We have Ron Stark. Hi, Ron. How are you? They had the other panel, they had opposite. The board president of the San Diego Veterans Coalition. Kimberly Mitchell, good to see you. President and CEO of Veterans Village of San Diego. Matt Schillingberg, commander of American Legion Post 146 in Encinitas. Thanks for being here. Greg Angel, CEO of Interfaith Community Services. Thank you. Easy commute for you, right across the street. And Tamara Kohler, CEO of the San Diego Regional Task Force on the Homeless. Thank you so much for being here. As you know, you'll have 5 minutes. Your full statement will be added to the record, and I want to make sure we stick to time. We have until 12:30, and then we got to be out of here. So we'll get right to it. Mr. Stark, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Representative Levin. It's an honor
Make
to
sure
be-
your mic's on.
Is it on?
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Representative Levin, Ranking Member Baracus, and House Committee Chair Takano. I like the idea of zero. It's a good target, and so appreciate that. I am Ron Stark, President of San Diego Veterans Coalition. I want to say that my testimony here with respect to this committee on Veteran Affairs Subcommittee Economic Opportunity entitled Housing Our Heroes, Addressing Homeless Veterans Crisis is given in my role as the president of the San Diego Veterans Coalition, though it's certainly informed by observations in other roles throughout the county. I work for mental health systems in substance use prevention. I've managed large treatment and recovery centers in substance abuse prevention. I'm the co-chair of the San Diego's One VA Community Advocacy Board, as co-chair on the advisory committee for the VA Aspire Center, as well as logistics coordinator for the Stand Down for Homeless Veterans. And those observations inform my perspective and that of the coalition. And it's an honor to be here with you and colleagues in the community in San Diego County. The number of homeless veterans using the annual point-in-time count method seems to always be met with challenges of being underreported, overreported, subjective measures, unreliable methods, counting veterans on the street early in the morning, and uses self-reports to interviewers and that. And though I participated in San Bernardino County when I was up there for 4 years in the homeless count, and San Diego County since 1997, and because I served in the military and these are my people, I'm going out and help find them, identify them so they can maybe get to other resources. I find that becoming an observation where I challenge whether or not we're really getting to all of the homeless veterans. I live in the 92114 in this county. We have what we call the Bamboo Village, and the point-in-time count doesn't go there. We walk by there, but we don't go there. And so there are places in that account where you just look and you know there's a path leading to where homeless are, but just the methods of it. In that regard, it seems that with some of the current technologies, we could develop, implement, and I think the House could really be instrumental in reviewing this. Sophisticated methods to have a more real-time estimate of the number and conditions of our veterans who are homeless. The San Diego Veterans Coalition has some 160 member and participating organizations, agencies, for-profit businesses, and we all come in contact with veterans every day, and we get together and we share our perspectives and coordinate activities to really maximize leverages across community-based organizations. The VA is a strong partner in that coalition as well, and organizations here at the table with me as well. We have supported and promoted a safeguarded cross-sector data sharing that provides a much more reliable estimate to use to determine how much funding programming is required and where. The idea We use currently, there's 57 licenses, I believe, with the San Diego United, and it's a platform, it's a data sharing platform, backbone supported by 211 San Diego, to do some initial screening, partially enroll, refer, intake, veterans, some minor intakes into services before referring, and then a follow-up. And that platform can provide a reliable number of how many veterans use a particular service and collect valuable demographic information to direct policy. SD United is capable of being interoperable with larger community information exchanges, and I know that's a topic across practically every state in this country, is how to share community information that includes information from public health, the VA, community-based organizations, providers, private practices, and can compare profiles and aggregate reports of how many veterans are homeless, their services requested, and usages of those, met and unmet needs, demographic and geographic information about veterans. So you could put the dollar where the need is, you could put the energy where the need is. Anecdotally, we hear there are veterans, especially female veterans, who are functionally homeless, going from one friend or family member in lieu of living on the streets, but yet not providing their own shelter, sleeping in their cars, parked off streets, in a friend's residence in there. And so that wouldn't be part of the homeless count, because you don't count cars parked at residence. You kind of look if the windows are, and it looks like someone's sleeping in that car.
Mr. Stark, I want to make sure we get to everybody's
Right.
intro.
Right.
But hold those thoughts.
Okay.
We're going to be asking you plenty of questions. I want to thank you for all the great work that you do, particularly the North County Stand Down. Had the honor to join you last year. Look forward to helping you in years ahead as well. Thank you for being here. I'd like to turn to Ms. Mitchell. Thank you for the recent visit to Veterans Village, San Diego. I know my ranking member, my friend Mr. Bilirakis, is going to be joining you later today. Now, would like to hear your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today and to provide testimony about the housing needs of our veterans. I'm Kim Mitchell, the President and CEO of Veterans Village of San Diego. We are a not-for-profit housing provider here in San Diego, and we serve more than 2,000 military veterans each year. I also serve on the board of directors for the California Association of Veteran Service Agencies, known as CAVSA, and I offer my testimony on behalf of both VVSD and CAVSA today. I want to begin by acknowledging the many men and women in the audience today who have served our country in uniform. Thank you for your service. Mr. Chairman, I am reassured by the title of today's hearing, Veteran Homelessness in a Crisis. It is one that touches both rural and urban parts of our country, and one that requires immediate resources and attention if we are ever going to get ahead of it. Today, in San Diego, we are finally catching our breath. The last 2 years have been difficult, as a devastating outbreak of hepatitis plagued our homeless communities across the region. In response, VVSD and our partners stood up an emergency bridge shelter to provide safe, clean living conditions for an additional 200 homeless veterans that were on the street and susceptible to this potential deadly virus. We had to act fast, but I believe our response not only helped rebuild livelihoods, but it also saved lives. As the immediate threat of hepatitis subsides, now is the perfect time for reflection. In my mind, the most important question is, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? Improvements can be made across the board, but because of the work that we do at VVSD, I can offer some concrete recommendations about what the VA can do to help. First, we need to expand the VA's grant per diem program, GPD, by increasing the rates at which providers are reimbursed. GPD is the first line of defense against veteran homelessness, and it is widely regarded as a successful short-term program that helps at-risk veterans get back on their feet. The program works, and VVSD and my fellow CAVSA members strongly support the goals and structure of the program as it operates today. It is worth noting, however, that the significant structural and regulatory changes to GPD 3 years ago made it more challenging to administer. VVSD and CAVSA commend the VA for improving the effectiveness of this important program, but note that the changes added significant costs to its grantees, such as we ask that Congress or VA increase the reimbursement rates by at least 25%. This modest increase will result in community partners like VVSD being able and willing to expand the number of beds they offer, especially to individuals participating in the bridge and clinical tracks. Second, we need to better leverage project-based HUD-VASH vouchers by contracting our supportive services to qualified veteran housing providers that receive these vouchers. As administrators of HUD-VASH project-based grants, VVSD and CAVSA members bear the burden of the VA by maintaining its 25-to-1 ratio in case managers to program participants. Our facilities, we see the VA case management staff are often so busy that it's hard for them to show up to provide our tenants with the mental health, job training, and social services support they need. As a result, we end up funding the support out of our own pockets. As nonprofits, this is hard to do. It is also especially frustrating given the fact that Congress has consistently funded these positions. It's just that the VA can't seem to be able to provide the staff that they need in the field. There are two solutions to this problem. Congress could enact legislation that awards the recipient of project-based HUD-VASH voucher program with the commensurate funding to administer the services provided with that voucher. Or the VA and HUD secretaries have virtually unlimited authority to waive law and regulation to improve the administration of HUD-VASH, could issue a directive to accomplish the same goal. Either way, the routine failure of the VA to provide the casework associated with HUD-VASH is a significant drag on the effectiveness of the program and must be remedied without delay. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, this concludes my oral remarks today, and I want to thank you again for shining a light on this important issue and working to improve the effectiveness of the VA's homeless housing programs. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Schillingberg, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, good morning, Congressman Levin, Congressman and Congressman Peters. Although I live in Congressman Peters' district, I do support Congressman Levin with the work of veterans in the North County because I'm the commander of the American Legion in Encinitas. Less than 1% of the population of the United States ever volunteered to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. In doing so, service members become a special part of our nation that are willing to sacrifice their own lives to preserve the freedoms that so many Americans enjoy on a daily basis. Over 2 million service members, men and women, have been deployed over 3 million times since 9/11 in the support of global war on terrorism. These troops have included active duty, reserve, National Guard personnel, with reserve and National Guard personnel being utilized as part of the operational force structure after 9/11. These numerous deployments are one of the many reasons that our service members decide to make a transition from military life to civilian life. And these numerous deployments weigh heavy on the veteran, which in turn manifests itself in many different ways that contribute to the problem of veteran homelessness in the United States. Active duty veterans and their families, as well as transition veterans, face significant housing challenges. California has the largest number of veteran homelessness in the United States, with 9,600 veterans homeless. Homeless veterans in California represent, as we've heard before, about 25% of the national homeless veteran population. Many veterans do not have stable housing after they separate from the military, and many housing markets in California, it is difficult, if not impossible, for military families and even single service members that might have once enjoyed military housing or barracks to transition to the civilian housing market. Only 54% of pre-veterans and 35% of post-9/11 veterans line up housing after the military in the San Francisco Bay Area. Only 10% of pre-9/11 and 18% of pre-9/11 veterans reported being homeless in Orange County. Over 25% of military veterans reported that they lacked housing in the past in Los Angeles, according to HUD. 1.5 million veteran households suffer severe housing costs in 2011, and it has only become worse. According to Los Angeles Housing, HUD-VASH housing vouchers have the lowest success rate amongst the housing vouchers that authority issues. Success is defined as placing the voucher recipient in rental units. The success rate of LA Housing Authority for non-veterans is 67%, and the success rate for HUD-VASH vouchers for veterans drops to 33%. This is unacceptable for our veterans, and changes need to be made to address the issue. San Diego County has one of the highest population of veterans in the United States, with an estimated, as you said, Congressman, 235,000 veterans. Most of the veterans choose to stay in San Diego County after retiring from the military or transitioning from service, and many, such as myself, returned to San Diego. I personally retired from the United States Army in Texas in 1996, but returned to my home here in San Diego. Transition from the military to civilian life was a very difficult after 20-year career in the military. Although retired with a pension, I faced the difficulty of translating my military skill sets to civilian world for job possibilities and securing housing for myself and my family. I was able to do so, but many veterans today cannot. It was a different time when I retired in 1996 to the present day transition for service members in San Diego County. It's estimated there are approximately 1,400 homeless veterans on the street in San Diego. The question becomes, is veteran homelessness possible in states with the highest incident, i.e. California and Washington State, especially since some of the areas have seen an increase, as we have, in homelessness? Answering the question is very complicated because many variables factor into the question. One of the variables is the HUD-VASH program that combines the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Housing Choice Voucher, rental assistance for homeless veterans and their families with case management and clinical services provided by the Department of Veterans Affairs at its medical centers in the community. Here lies one of the problems of the program: eligibility. As defined on the Veterans website, Veterans Affairs website, veterans who are appropriate for this program, and it should read any veteran, must be VA health care eligible veterans. VA makes that determination. Most healthy veterans and their families never apply for the veterans benefits as part of their transition from the military. Others that have been wounded or injured during the service are often provided with veteran service officers to complete their benefits package as they transition from the military. Those service members that never applied to the VA system are not in the VA system. When they run into difficulties and become homeless, the VA can't help them with the HUD vouchers until they get into the system. Proposed
You want to just wrap up?
Okay.
So we can-
Yeah, proposed solutions are handoffs, and we'll talk about that. You had questions before, and we'll get into those questions, but I believe that there are solutions.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate that. Now I'd like to recognize Mr. Angel for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Levin, fellow Congress people. Thank you for being here today. It's wonderful to have you in our community, and those of you who are from here. My name is Greg Angel. I'm the CEO of Interfaith Community Services. We're the largest provider of housing and social services for people experiencing homelessness in North County, including, unfortunately, hundreds of veterans experiencing homelessness in North County. We've heard a lot of really strong and practical suggestions for what can be done to better help people overcome homelessness, and particular veterans today. I want to highlight one thing and then share some personal stories as somebody doing this on the front lines. Homelessness among veterans has decreased nearly 50% in less than a decade. That's been the cause of a significant scaling of federally funded programs to address homelessness. If we choose to not continue to scale, we choose to not continue to reduce the number of veterans experiencing homelessness. It's very simple arithmetic. I think we need to name that reality. There are some changes in scope that can also help people experiencing homelessness today and in the future. I detailed some of these stories in my submitted testimony, and I want to share them today. Their names are changed to protect their confidentiality, but these are real people. Jacob is a 39-year-old Marine Corps veteran who lost his housing in February of this year because he has a disability he suffered during his military service. He has young children, he fell behind on his rent, and he lost his housing. There was no homeless prevention funding available that would have helped him through government funds to stay housed at this time in February of this year. All of the programs that are out there are staffed at the government level or at the nonprofit level by individuals who are there to run particular programs. Jacob didn't know which program he was qualified for. He didn't know where to go. Jacob had the fortune, though, of eventually finding his way to somebody who was funded by private philanthropy locally to say, you know what, these programs are great, but we need to fund people who will help any veteran, regardless of need. So he came to Interfaith and met with a housing stability case manager funded by the Midway Museum and by San Diego Grantmakers. That person who was focused just on him as a veteran connected him to a veterans benefits specialist who correctly upgraded his disability benefit to the accurate 100% level that it should have been at. That person helped him find an apartment that he can afford, and then helped find private donor dollars to help pay for the move-in expenses. Jacob and his kids are now stably housed. It highlights another issue, an extreme lack of homeless prevention resources that we have. We've talked a lot about helping people who are chronically homeless, who've been on the streets a long time. The best way to help those individuals is to prevent them from becoming homeless in the first place. The Supportive Services for Veteran Families grant has been a real game changer in the last several years, but the amount of funds that it provides, rental assistance dollars, for homeless prevention is scant. So when we had a veteran, who I'm going to call Clarissa, who was referred to us by her HUD-VASH case manager because she had a voucher, but her landlord was not going to renew her rent, renew her lease. She has 4 children. She's putting herself through school. She has a disability. Her monthly income is about $700. When she was referred to us, there were no homeless prevention dollars to allow her to pay for the security deposit that she needed to move into another apartment. So we helped her find that apartment. We helped her with private dollars to pay for that security deposit. She's stably housed. We need to significantly scale homeless prevention resources, and they need to be flexible and focused on veterans, regardless of their situation. Kim mentioned it very well, too. The Veteran Grant Per Diem program is a fantastic resource, but the funding level that it provides is really only adequate for higher functioning veterans. I detailed in my testimony a veteran who I call Bill, 79-year-old Navy veteran who was connected to our organization by a distant relative who knew he had been wandering the streets for decades. Bill had disability benefits, but had no meaningful relationships in his life, suffered from paranoia, mood swings, refused to engage with the VA on medical services, and simply did not succeed in the level of care that $47 a day can provide. He's sadly one of a large wave of disabled senior veterans. We need a higher level of support, in particular, for senior disabled veterans. Appreciate your time and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Angel. Appreciate it very much. Now I'd like to recognize Ms. Kohler for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Tamara Kohler. I am the CEO of the Regional Task Force on the Homeless. We are the HUD Continuum of Care for San Diego County, the second largest county in the state of California. We have a large geographic area and a population that is almost at 3.4 million with 240,000 veterans. We are one of the largest continuum of cares across the nation. There are 400 continuum of cares. They're designed to promote this community-wide commitment as a goal to end homelessness and collectively work with our partners to tailor a local homeless crisis response system. Veterans experience homelessness in every state, but over a quarter reside in California. With these numbers in mind, the Regional Task Force is uniquely positioned to offer some data and insight into our veteran homelessness. I'm going to focus on just a couple areas. The risk factor of affordable housing, which you've heard from a number of my colleagues, and limited prevention resources that Greg so well spoke to. Also, our rapidly increasing women veterans and our aging homeless population. With the housing costs rising faster than wages and the burden of affordable rent looming larger for many of our veterans, especially our young families and those that are aging or on fixed incomes. And in some cases, this is an unsurmountable challenge. According to Zillow's Consumer Housing Trend Report in 2017, 80% of renters moved because of an increase in their monthly rent, and we're seeing that across the board. Increasingly, major metro areas are becoming out of reach, and this is becoming true even in areas where markets were historically affordable. For many, ending their homelessness is becoming more simply about increased income and lower housing costs than it is intense case management and services. Increases in affordable housing, increases in rent, tight rental markets, and limited housing stock all contribute to the difficulties we find in looking for adequate and affordable housing to rehouse our homeless population. Our HMIS data is showing that our national averages of return to homelessness in San Diego are much higher. Our people that we are housing are struggling to maintain the housing that we've been able to achieve for them without any assistance moving forward. Continuing options within the SSVF are transformational with prevention and rapid resolution. And one of the most recent developments in SSVF is a shallow subsidy. With 12 communities, San Diego being one of those, we are able to model a shallow subsidy option for high-cost rent areas. This targeted attention to housing affordability as a primary factor contributing to homelessness and housing instability makes this long-term modest subsidy a welcomed option. We know housing ends homelessness, and that includes preventing homelessness. Conditions that increase a veteran's risk of experiencing homelessness are varied, and we've talked about those. But those episodes of homelessness could be rare and brief, and we wouldn't even have to worry about them being non-reoccurring if we would address them quickly with SSVF prevention and rapid resolution funding. Increasing this funding will also allow us to collect better data so that we can really determine which risk factors are having the most devastating effects on veterans resulting in their homelessness. Our veteran population is aging, and they are very likely going to have increased complex age-related needs that pose significant challenges on our system. It is not designed to serve them. Long-term healthcare issues and independent living options will become greater challenges, and housing options for our homeless veterans are going to be limited. Our data in our HMIS significantly show an increase in veterans over the age of 62 in 2 years. In 2017, 1 in 5 of our homeless veterans were over the age of 62. In the first quarter of 2019, it is now 1 in 4. 26% of our veterans in San Diego are over the age of 62. Additionally, during that same time frame, 12% of those served with SSVF, so that's rapid rehousing, not a permanent housing subsidy, were 12%. In 2019, it's increased to 18%. We need those permanent housing resources to really address these emerging challenges. 12% of our veterans, 12% of the nation's veterans will be women in 2025. That means we'll likely see an increase of our veterans, women, in the coming years. Compared with non-veteran peers, women veterans report a higher rate of child mistreatment, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Over a third of your enlisted women have a history of childhood sexual abuse, and many report, especially those who are homeless, that they join the military to escape those family conditions. Veteran women are twice as likely to experience homelessness than our female homeless individuals. The characteristics of veteran women that experience homelessness are different from veteran men, and we need to acknowledge that. More than 1/3 have experienced a military sexual trauma while in service, and they have lower rates of substance use and mental health issues, and we question if that's just an underreporting, but that's what the data is telling us. For veteran women, intimate partner violence is also a challenge and highly associated with and contributes to homelessness. Finally, veteran women experiencing homelessness are more likely to be part of a family compared to veteran men. All programs serving our women veterans need to have a sense of urgency and a focus on safe housing options. These services need to be assessed for and addressed in experiencing trauma and housing instability at the same time. As we know, VASH is the most successful coordinated effort to address homelessness in the nation. This single dedicated resource to reduce the number of homeless veterans by nearly 50% nationally has been highly effective. This is proof that dedicating resources does and will reduce homelessness. I just want to acknowledge these growing challenges, and the major challenge that we need to address includes all of our best efforts, both collectively and individually. We need to dig deeper, we need to understand our data, we need to be informed, and we need to ask more of our system planning, not only as our funders, but also as leaders as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kohler. Thank you, everyone, for your opening statement. We're going to have time for one round of questions, so I would just encourage everyone to keep your answers fairly brief so we can get through as many questions as possible. I'd like to recognize myself, and I'm glad we have so many community organizations such as yourselves. Without you, the federal government cannot do this alone. We desperately need your help, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to empower you to continue the great work that you're doing. And I also really want to mirror the comments that you made, Mr. Angel, about preventing homelessness in the first place. It was said in the first panel the importance of recognizing that we will save significant resources. We can prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place as opposed to dealing with homelessness once it occurs. And I also appreciated your highlighting the need for short-term, crisis-based rental assistance. So I'd like to begin with you. How do you see such a program working in a manner that's agile enough to quickly get funds to those who need them without sacrificing accountability over how the funds are spent?
Thank you for the question. My organization set a goal 2 years ago to nearly double the amount of people we were able to end and prevent homelessness for, and was able to surpass that goal primarily through an enhancement of homeless prevention funding. With funding now from the Regional Task Force, we're working with dozens of partners, including Veterans Village of San Diego, to scale that homeless prevention funding and partner with our local 2-on-1 database to track the long-term impact of those individuals, including veterans, who get that funding. To be able to track not only are they housed, 41 families who we housed through one of these programs a year ago are all still housed, but are they reducing calls for service and need for food, need for other types of services? So we have the mechanisms in place to track the long-term outcomes of these interventions, as well as a control against, unfortunately, those who do not receive the interventions. We just need the resources to actually provide the assistance.
Thank you for that. And a related question is really open to any of you. What data could the federal government provide or collect to better identify veterans who are at risk of homelessness but are not yet homeless?
Mr. Chairman, in my mind, I think we need to do a better job at identifying service members before they exit the military that have been identified as having the start of mental health and addiction issues. I know for myself in the Navy, I served with sailors that were quite often angry. We knew that they would go out drinking all night, and then talking with some of the veterans at VVSD, these issues started when they were in the military. And I think commanders we need to work on the culture and enable commanders and to enable their service members to say it's okay to step forward, that mental health. If I sprain my ankle, immediately I'm sent to sick call. But if I have a mental health issue, no one wants to say anything like that. We need to make it okay to send folks and be agreeable to go to and talk with someone.
Thank you. So destigmatizing mental health. Mr. Stark, I wanted to turn to you. You mentioned that public and private partners in our region use the San Diego United platform to coordinate services for homeless veterans while aggregating data in real time. How does this system account for traditionally undercounted veterans, such as those living in cars or with family or friends?
Well, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that works coordinated with the Courage to Call program, which is a Mental Health Services Act funded program here in the county, which has mental health workers from MHS, peer outreach with VVSD, Veterans Village of San Diego, and 2-on-1 navigators who are peers and veterans working. Shared experience is one of the keys to reaching veterans. And when we use this information, we have with the SSVF funding been able to work with the providers of SSVF funding to come up with an initial application that is coordinated across all of them. And so when they're referred out, it becomes a more rapid intake and a more rapid use of that SSVF funding. If I have just a moment, though, I do want to comment on Tamara and Greg's comment about the aging veterans. It's long been known that the veteran community is the leading edge of what you might see in the community elsewhere, with homeless veterans, with substance use, mental health, living on the street, poor hygiene. We're gonna find as a nation that is the leading edge of an aging veteran population, and that could be telling us a lot about what we need to do. That group of folks are not on the radar right now.
In the interest of time, I have more questions for everybody, but we'll do it offline. And I'd like to turn to the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up on that, I understand that Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, banned people from homeless or people sleeping in cars. And then also, I understand the city of San Diego did the same thing recently. Correct me if I'm wrong. But if it's true, what's the rationale behind it? Are these people identified, particularly in this case, veterans, so that we can help them get shelter? And so if somebody want to respond to that, I'd appreciate it.
In North County, if I could,
Okay.
In North County, we have funding another provider does for a safe parking program, because there are a hidden homeless population who are living in their cars. And if we aren't able to help them, they will no longer have cars and they will fall farther into homelessness. No local jurisdiction has accepted the request to be able to house that safe parking program. It's a shocking example of NIMBYism that needs to stop.
Is it true that both San Diego and Los Angeles have banned people sleeping in cars? Is that the case? Is that?
So there are local parking ordinances that 72 hours of a vehicle being parked in the same place. You have pressures of call for service from the community that this car has been here. So these are some local constraints that are happening, and there's no safe place to be, and you have to constantly be on the move. Eventually, a homeless veteran is not going to have the gas money to move their car or have a flat. It looks like an abandoned vehicle. And so I think that kind of lends to it as well. And there are people that will let someone park off the street on their residence because they're humane people and goodwill people in this county, but then that further distances them from care.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Just to answer your question, the city of San Diego has been embroiled in a discussion about how to use parking lots it has around various locations to allow people to sleep. That has not been finalized, but I don't believe that there's such a ban in place in the city of San Diego.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Ms. Kim, I look forward to visiting Veterans Village for the second time this afternoon. I think it's a model for the entire nation.
Yes, sir.
I love the concept. You talked about mental health and the fact that we're not screening enough, maybe while our veterans or active military personnel are in DOD. What's your opinion on mandatory screening prior to veterans being leaving the service and becoming veterans? Obviously confidential, but if you screen everyone, you can identify, and then it's obviously their decision as to whether they want treatment or not. What is your opinion on that? I know it's controversial, but we got to face it. Yes.
Yes, sir. I mean, obviously it is controversial, and a lot of it is self-identification. A lot of folks, a lot of service members don't want to admit that they may have depression or anxiety or any type of mental health challenge, and they don't want the stigma attached to that. So, but I think in the long run, it will help. It will help folks get on the right path to seeking services, but I think it also starts at the top where commanders need to ensure and senior enlisted need to ensure and push down to the lower ranks that it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, that's true, no question, and we have made some progress generally nationwide. But what about mandatory screening? Screening everyone, and then releasing the information to the individual confidentially. I think that would be helpful. What do you think? Anybody else?
I think that's one of the big issues here is the transition process. So in the transition process, when they're leaving the service, they should be assigned a veteran service officer to start them out with their benefits, whether they have been wounded, et cetera, but to get them into the system. And it should be pretty easy also, because you've got a DOD personnel system with their medical records that has all their medical history that could have been transitioned over into the VA system. There could be a handoff technically so that they could be in the system and be able to receive those benefits if something comes up, later on down the road.
Yeah.
There is nothing like that right now. And so, being able to support a transition program with a veteran service officer, then those guys that are veteran service officers can identify those, mental illnesses or, come up with the challenges, because we see that.
Based on what's in the record?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I know I have to yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member Bilirakis. I'd now like to recognize Chairman Takano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Levin. Ms. Mitchell, about how many project-based HUD-VASH vouchers do you administer?
I'll have to get the exact
I mean,
numbers.
just a ballpark. I mean, is it 20, 30, 50, 100?
I'm not sure the exact numbers.
You're not sure. But so help us understand, the HUD-VASH voucher project, the project-based voucher, it's not only the voucher not only is a revenue stream to help the project, survive financially or to be viable financially, but that voucher also comes with what you say are the supportive services from the VA. And you're saying that organizations like yours have trouble getting those counselors and getting those wraparound services that are supposed to come to the VA to actually come out and provide those services. That's what your testimony
Yes, sir.
said.
Yes, sir.
I've heard this from other providers as well. And you say you propose 2 solutions. Can you elaborate more about I want to give you some time to talk about what those 2 solutions might be.
Well, the 2 solutions with regards to the legislation is.
I mean, I've heard other people say, why don't you just allow us to hire our own people? We could hire them for less than the VA. I would have some pushback from some of the folks at the VA who think that, they ought to have those positions. But you have some thoughts about this? How do we tackle this problem of
sir,
not coming from the Go ahead.
Well, I think it's one of those things, situations where it's what's in the best interest of our homeless veteran and their family. If they need services right away and the VA case manager is unable to get out there, the service provider who is charged with taking care of that should be able to have someone that can go out but for like myself as at VVSD and some of the other CAVSA members, we have to provide some of that case management out of our own pocket if the VA field folks, case managers aren't able to go out there.
Here's where I wish I had the VA still at the table, because I'd like to be able to go back, have a back and forth about why are we having an issue with case workers getting out to provide, Commander, you have something to say about?
Well, The American Legion, we're about a half a block from the Community Resource Center in Encinitas. And what we've been doing is working with the Community Resource Center to identify the veterans to get them into the VA system. But at the same time, the veterans are being able to resource the Resource Center for food, for shelter, and other things. And this is one of the reasons why we all come together as a community, not just as veterans, but to help everyone. So the Community Resource Center has been able to help them out, and in the transition, it's getting them to the VA system so that they can get the HUD VASH vouchers.
Well, go ahead, Mr.
The VA released a funding opportunity this year, an addendum to their grant per diem program, a case management opportunity for funding to just support veterans like we've talked about today, who maybe already have HUD-VASH or have exited GPD programs. To my knowledge, not a single provider applied for that funding locally. The reason that we did not is that the funding was not adequate. It didn't provide enough funding to pay for the social worker to do the work, didn't provide enough funding for them to do the mileage to go out and meet with people, didn't have any money to actually help them keep somebody housed. There's more to say about it, but it's an example of a really well-intentioned program that just wasn't adequately resourced and was too restrictive.
This is very important feedback, because I've heard this complaint more than once and from different providers, that the wraparound services, the social worker, the caseworker, they're not getting out to places where these the HUD VASH vouchers. That's the way it's supposed to work. HUD provides the money for the housing. The VA support provides the support, the wraparound support. I'm troubled that there seems to be some disconnect there. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to recognize Representative Peters for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Again, thanks to all the witnesses for making yourselves available. I want to ask Ms. Kohler, I'm aware that you have a coordinated entry system. Can you walk us through the process by which veterans are handled in that system? And let me know if you have any recommendations to improve referrals with your community partners or with your agencies.
Thank you. We are responsible for a coordinated entry system, which is more than just a referral to housing. It's coordinating anyone experiencing homelessness through a homeless system. But specific to the veterans' experience, we work very, very closely with the VA in 2 areas of funding. So in the VASH voucher funding and in the SSVF, so the rapid rehousing, we make referrals directly to them of any eligible veterans. Fortunately for San Diego, at least from the numbers we're seeing, we have enough resources to be able to refer anybody who an assessment is done that is identified as a veteran. The reason I bring that up is part of the identification is one of the bigger challenges for veterans. Veterans don't always self-identify as being appropriately eligible. Many times they will think that they're ineligible for things or not even identify themselves as a veteran when they're seeking homeless services. But if someone identifies as a veteran, we collect specific information in the assessment. Some interesting data for you. We have about 700 veterans on a by name list currently that are referred to.
On what list?
Of our by name list. We use a by name list in the coordinated entry, which is a way that we take everyone who's assessed and we organize them by vulnerability, by eligibility. So in San Diego, we have 700 veterans on that list. In that list, over a third of those veterans, which we believed would be eligible for VASH, look like they're not because of dishonorable discharge, of different eligibility, and it creates a significant challenge in the sense that that is the most eligible appropriate resource in their homelessness, and we're not able to really associate them with that benefit. The veterans with those referrals, it is up to the Veterans Administration team to then determine who will get the next voucher. It is done with a client focus on where case management is. It's done in coordination of where a veteran maybe is seeking services or where they should be best stably housed. But they then make the connection between the homeless veteran and the housing authority. And all of the paperwork and all of that is done directly from the VA and our housing authorities. We're fortunate to have enough resources so that we refer everybody over, but it is taking far too long. And as Supervisor Fletcher mentioned, we have a significant amount of veterans with vouchers that cannot lease up. And so, and when they can't lease up, that voucher is not eligible for someone else either. So that is a resource that is held in limbo until they can actually find a location to rent, which really speaks to the bias and stigma around a homeless population in general. Even with the care around veterans, we're not housing them at the rate we should.
Well, I think it speaks to the importance of dealing with this other than honorable issue.
Yeah.
And, thanks to the committee for supporting our bill. I also wanted to call attention to the Fair Housing Improvement Act, which I introduced, that bans discrimination based on the source of income and vet status. I think that's part of the problem. I think maybe a larger problem is the general housing costs that we have here, but I think that that's an element of it. I'm going to yield to Mr. Takano in a second, just for some more questions, but I did want to thank Mr. Schillenberg for the ideas on the handoff, and also for bringing some District 52 expertise and leadership to Mr. Levin's district. I'll yield to Mr. Takano.
I'm also working with Assembly District Tasha Horvath on her Veterans Committee, and one of the bills that is winding its way through California is SB 222, which will make it against the law to discriminate for anyone with that HUD voucher.
Thank you. Did you want to? I'll yield to the remainder of my time, Mr. Takano. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Angel, how much more money would it have taken for you to be encouraged to apply for the grant you referenced earlier? How short was it?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, it was a $225,000 grant over 2 years, and an additional 10 to 20%, and also just the flexibility to be able to move funding across line items. It was very restrictive.
Real quick, for prevention, for homelessness prevention, how much money are we talking about? Do you think we need?
So it costs.
Have you quantified it?
Yeah, it costs us about $1,000 to prevent homelessness for most people. It costs us more than $10,000 per household.
$1,000 per household.
Per household.
Per household would be effective prevention. All right, I wish we had more time, but thank you for that. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Thank you, Chairman Levin. I appreciate that generosity. So let's talk about that a little more. I mean, how many people do you think we could prevent homelessness for $1,000? I mean, per household. How many households are we talking about?
I believe hundreds of households. I mean, we prevented homelessness this last year at my organization alone for 450 individuals. That's about 130 households. And again, an average of $1,000 each, and that's only the capacity we had. The amount of requests we received are far greater. That number will be greater this year through the study I mentioned, and we'll have the data to show the long-term impact, but it's a significant number, sir.
I hope you'll stay in touch with our committee so we can get that study from you. And it seems to, seems apparent, I mean, it's evident to me that it's going to cost us far less to prevent it than to deal with the consequences of actually having it happen. So thank you.
I would also add, when we talk
go ahead.
about prevention in high rent districts, the cost that it takes to house somebody is almost $10,000 compared to the $1,000 to prevent it. So when we have such a tight market and it's so expensive, it's even more important that we focus on that prevention. It's money well saved and money well spent.
Great, thank you.
I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank everyone in the audience as well, and we can now bring this hearing to a close. I think we've all learned a lot that'll inform our work when we go back to Washington. I've had no greater honor in my first 8 months of service than to be the chairman of this subcommittee, where we have the chance to give back in a small way to the veterans who have given so much in service of our country. I'm grateful to my friend, the ranking member, for carrying forward the work of this subcommittee in a true spirit of bipartisanship. I'm grateful to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Takano, for his outstanding leadership, and I'm thankful to my friend, Mr. Peters, for continuing to lead on veterans issues. We need all of you to continue the work, to work together to help us get in this region, in San Diego, and really throughout the United States, to a effective rate of zero veteran homelessness. And I think we've learned today just how complex and challenging an issue this is, but one that we are absolutely committed to address. And as long as I have the opportunity to serve as a member of Congress, this will be a top priority of mine, and I think a top priority of my colleagues as well. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your time. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include additional materials. I want to thank the great staff as well, my great District Director Francine Busby back there and Andy Ortega, everyone on the House Veterans Affairs Committee staff who made this happen. Faith from our from our DC office as well have just done an outstanding job. I want to thank everybody for watching this as it was live streamed. This is actually on YouTube and on social media, so I hope a lot of people were able to watch across the country and learn as we have here today in Oceanside. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.